Never before has the world witnessed such a great shock. The US and China have just officially reduced taxes to only 10%, a surprising decision that could change the global economic landscape. But what's even more remarkable, the price of gold, which is considered a safe haven in times of instability, is plummeting. Is this just a temporary response, or a sign of far-reaching changes in financial markets? On a surprising morning of May 12th, the financial world held its breath as the United States and China simultaneously announced a dramatic reduction in tariffs. These were not vague statements or empty promises. This time the numbers were specific, clear, and unprecedented. The US decided to reduce import tariffs on Chinese goods from a staggering 145% to just 30%. Meanwhile, China didn't stand idle. It slashed tariffs on American goods from 125% to just 10%. Both sides gave up 115 percentage points, a handshake that just a few months ago, no one believed could happen. What's interesting is that this agreement didn't come after a cozy meeting or an optimistic post on social media. It was the result of intense negotiations at the JNEV conference last weekend, where both sides were not only strategizing, but also carefully navigating to avoid a no-exit trade war. The agreement is only temporary, lasting 90 days. But those 90 days are like a pause button, allowing the world to breathe a sigh of relief. The escalating tariffs, which once made global markets panic, are now put on hold, at least in the short term. A turning point has just occurred, and even though everything is still experimental for the next 3 months, this event has already stirred up the global trade chessboard. After the announcement of the tariff reduction agreement, the financial markets immediately reacted strongly, and gold was one of the first victims of this shock. Before the deal was revealed, gold prices remained at a lofty level of around $2,300 per ounce. The reason gold maintained such a high price was due to concerns about Middle Eastern conflicts and the Federal Reserve's tightening monetary policy. These factors drove investors to flock to gold as a safe haven. However, once the agreement was announced, fear diminished significantly. Investors were no longer as worried about trade conflicts or economic instability. As a result, gold prices quickly plummeted, potentially dropping to $2,200 per ounce or even lower. Not only gold, but also stocks showed signs of recovery. The USD rose slightly, and global financial markets began to show positive signals. The world seemed to breathe a sigh of relief as the trade tensions between the two superpowers, the US and China, temporarily eased. However, the market remains somewhat cautious. If this agreement is merely a temporary truce lasting 90 days, the fear sentiment could return, pushing gold prices back up a bit. But in the short term, gold will likely struggle to maintain the high levels it had before. Everything depends on how the parties address the remaining issues after this agreement. Before the US and China agreed to reduce tariffs, the situation was far from comfortable, especially for the US. At that time, Washington had imposed extremely high tariffs, up to 145% on Chinese goods. This was the harshest punitive tariff the US had ever applied on Beijing, as part of its broader trade pressure strategy. President Trump had previously imposed a base 10% tariff on over 180 trade partners worldwide. However, China, being the most heated partner, faced much higher tariffs. This move not only angered Beijing, but also raised concerns globally, from multinational corporations to US allies. Then, on May 9th, Trump unexpectedly pivoted. He announced a temporary 90-day tariff suspension. This decision opened a door amid the tension. Almost immediately, negotiations were restarted. China quickly responded, leading to the major agreement announced just days later. So why did the US take the initiative to back down? It's clear. The US economy was facing significant pressure. First, inflation was one of the biggest challenges for the government and the Federal Reserve. Rising prices were frustrating consumers and making it difficult for businesses to operate. Second, there was the looming risk of a recession. If the trade war continued, businesses would remain trapped by high import costs and supply chain disruptions, potentially pulling the US economy into a slowdown. In other words, the US needed this agreement just as much as China, and now was the time to pause hostilities and clear the path for a longer-term solution. The US was not the only side with reasons to back down in this trade war. China, although maintaining a strong image at the negotiating table, was actually facing many difficulties in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. First and foremost, China's economy had not fully recovered from the shock of COVID. Domestic consumption was slow, investment was scarce, and market confidence had not yet returned. The prolonged trade tensions only made the situation more challenging. Moreover, the 125% tariff on US goods had put China in a difficult position. Businesses were facing higher input costs, especially small and medium-sized enterprises, as many raw materials, technologies, and medical equipment still had to be imported from the US. Another major issue was the global supply chain. China, as the world's factory, desperately needed stability in the flow of goods. If the trade war continued, many international companies might shift their orders to other countries, weakening China's export position. Therefore, China's motivation to engage in negotiations was clear. They needed a temporary agreement with significant tariff reductions to stabilize production, maintain supply chains, and create an opportunity for economic recovery. This deal not only helped improve China's relationship with the US, but also served as a way to buy time and regain economic momentum. On a remarkable day, May 12th, a crucial announcement captured the attention of the entire world. After tense but hopeful negotiations at Geneva, the US and China reached an unexpected decision, a significant tax cut, effective immediately. But what does this mean for the global economy? Before this agreement was made public, the tariffs the US imposed on Chinese goods had reached a staggering 145%, while China also applied a 125% tariff on US goods. This enormous tax made these goods more expensive than ever before. However, after the agreement, the US reduced its tariff to 30%, while China lowered its tariff to only 10%, a 115 percentage point reduction, with both sides taking significant steps to ease tensions. What seemed like merely a nod from the world's two largest economies was, in fact, a decision with far-reaching consequences. Both sides agreed to halt further escalation of tariffs for 90 days, a brief window for negotiators to work out remaining issues. This agreement acted as a temporary ceasefire, cooling the tensions that had been ongoing since 2018. But this agreement goes beyond just lowering tariffs. The US and China also agreed to establish a long-term cooperation mechanism, promising to open a new chapter in their bilateral relations. To implement this, Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng, US Treasury Secretary Scott Benn, and US Trade Representative Jamie Senner will take the lead. What stands out is that both sides have committed to meeting regularly. These meetings will alternate between the US, China, or even a third country. When necessary, working groups will be formed to quickly resolve emerging issues in their trade relationship. This unprecedented mechanism not only aims to address current problems, but also paves the way for a stable and sustainable dialogue channel for the future. With this agreement, both countries aim to avoid a full-scale trade war. In fact, the US and China share common interests in collaborating, not just reducing tariffs, but also expanding markets and maintaining stability in global supply chains. The tax reduction agreement between the US and China brings many clear benefits to the US economy. A notable change is that imported goods from China will become cheaper, helping to reduce costs for businesses, especially in the electronics, textiles, and home appliance industries. American consumers also benefit from reduced product prices, helping them save on daily living expenses. Inflation, which is a painful problem for the US government, will be better controlled thanks to tax reduction. This not only reduces pressure on consumers, but also creates opportunities for the US Federal Reserve, Fed, to adjust monetary policy more flexibly, especially controlling interest rates. However, not all industries benefit from this agreement. Industries such as domestic steel, aluminum, and electronic components may face difficulties due to competition with cheap imports. Without support measures, domestic small businesses may face the risk of job loss and social problems. For China, this agreement also brings great benefits. Reducing import tariffs helps US goods, especially agricultural products, technology, energy, and medical equipment, become cheaper. This not only helps Chinese consumers save, but also stimulates domestic consumption, which is important when the Chinese economy is recovering slowly from the pandemic. Chinese small businesses, especially in the agricultural and small manufacturing sectors, will benefit from more stable supply chains and reduced taxes. This helps maintain domestic production, opening up opportunities for small companies to grow and compete better in the global market. However, China faces a big challenge when American goods are both cheap and of good quality, making it difficult for Chinese small businesses to compete. Both countries have their own opportunities and challenges, but with the right supportive policies, this agreement can benefit both the US and China, boosting the economy and minimizing negative impacts. When the US and China announced a tax reduction agreement, tensions between the two powers immediately eased, causing global financial markets to recover strongly. Investors feel more optimistic about the economic outlook, with stocks rising and the dollar strengthening, reflecting renewed confidence in the US economy. The most notable thing is the sharp drop in gold prices. In the past, gold has always been a safe haven in times of uncertainty. However, with this agreement, concerns are reduced, causing investors to withdraw capital from gold and switch to other investment channels. Gold prices therefore plummeted, possibly falling below $2,200 per ounce. The agreement not only benefits the US and China, but also sends a positive signal to the global economy. Amid populism, geopolitical conflicts, and epidemics, this tax reduction is an important step to promote international free trade. At the same time, the agreement opens up opportunities for businesses to adjust their investment strategies. Instead of focusing solely on close markets, they could return to cross-border trade, a more attractive option when the trade environment is more stable. In short, the tax reduction agreement between the US and China not only directly affects the economies of the two countries, but also has a profound impact on financial markets and global trade strategies. Although the tariff reduction agreement between the US and China is a significant short-term step forward, the question remains whether it is enough to resolve the deeper issues between the two countries. The agreement lasts only 90 days, and the question is whether this will serve as a solid foundation for long-term cooperation or just a temporary ceasefire before tensions flare up again. The technological rivalry between the two countries shows no signs of cooling, especially in critical areas like artificial intelligence, 5G, and semiconductors, which both the US and China view as key to maintaining national strength. Additionally, concerns about economic security remain high, with both nations relying on global supply chains and not wanting to let their rival control crucial technologies. Furthermore, geopolitical issues like the South China Sea and Taiwan will continue to be decisive factors in the relationship between these two powers. The big question now is, will the US and China be able to turn these 90 days of ceasefire into a long-term agreement, or is it just a temporary opportunity before tensions rise again? The answer to this question will not only affect the two countries, but will also have profound implications for the stability and peace of the global economy.